Hello and welcome to Insomniac Dose. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. The sodium lamp outside the fence is still on. I need to say that first because it's the only normal thing left. My name, and I am not going to say it out loud, I've learned that, is still on the clipboard by the door. The shift log is still open to the last entry I made at 5:12 in the morning. The coffee in my thermos is still warm. Everything is fine except for the footprints. They start at the overflow drain. They come in a straight line across the gravel, on through the gate, which is still locked, the padlock still closed, the chain still intact. And they stop at the door I'm standing behind. There are no prints leading away. Something is standing on the other side of this door. I know it is because I can hear it breathing. Or something shaped like breathing. Slow, measured, patient in a way that makes the patient feel deliberate, like a demonstration. The notebook in my hand has 4 rules I wrote myself in the last hour, even from watching it. None of them covers what happens when it comes to the door. I should have read the first notebook more carefully. I should have read all of them. I should have taken seriously the part where Delia wrote in pencil so hard it nearly tore the page. The drain rule is backwards. Ignoring it is what it wants. I didn't. I laughed. 48 hours earlier? The gravel road out to the Carver County Water Tower starts 3 miles past a shuttered grain elevator on Route 9, and it doesn't get better from there. 12 miles of teeth-rattling ruts, overgrown berms, and the occasional dead possum flattened so long ago it's become part of the road's topography. I drove it with my headlights on high and my window cracked, listening to the flat silence of open farmland, and I will tell you honestly, it felt like disappearing. And that was the point. My name is Marcus Hale, the real Marcus Hale, the one with the water utility certification card and the 2 years of field experience with the county, owes $40,000 to people whose debt collection process involves car doors and kneecaps. I borrowed his identity the same way you borrow a jacket when you're cold, without asking, without guilt, with the clear understanding that you'll probably never return it in the same condition you found it. And the placement agency that hired me didn't ask questions. Night maintenance, solo rotation, 12-hour shift, cash envelope on Friday. The job description said monitor pressure readings, conduct hourly panel checks, document anomalies. It did not say anything about the tower itself, which rose out of the flat, treeless field as I approached, gray and enormous against a sky full of cheap stars, shaped like a mushroom grown wrong, in all top-heavy dome and thin cylindrical throat above a concrete apron. There was a chain-link fence enclosing maybe half an acre around the base. 1 sodium lamp on a steel pole, buzzing orange light that made everything look like a crime scene photo. A metal equipment shed about the size of a garden shed padlocked. And the main door, steel, heavy, painted county green, with a keypad lock that the placement agency had texted me the code for at 6 that evening. Inside, a concrete floor, the fluorescent tubes overhead. Panel B against the left wall with its gauges and pressure displays, a folding chair, a folding table, a battered coffee maker. A drain in the floor in the back right corner, and taped to the inside of the door at eye level, laminated, a sheet of paper with a bold header at the top. Night shift operational guidelines. Carver County Water Authority. Rule 1. Conduct hourly pressure readings from panel B only. Do not use panel A. Rule 2. Maintain noise levels below conversation volume near the base platform. Rule 3. Do not acknowledge sounds from the overflow drain. Rule 4. Report pressure anomalies to the emergency line provided. Do not investigate personally. Rule 5. Do not open the equipment shed after dark. I read it twice. The language was corporate, slightly awkward in the way that institutional safety guidelines tend to be. Written by a committee terrified of liability, and the overflow drain rule was a little odd. Most facilities had drain maintenance protocols, not drain silence protocols. But I'd worked enough industrial sites to know that strange liquids, strange gases, and strange acoustics were always possible in enclosed utility spaces. Old infrastructure made old sounds. I pocketed my phone, started the coffee maker, and sat down in the folding chair with my clipboard. The job felt easy. More than easy. It felt like exactly the kind of blank, uncomplicated work I needed. Nobody comes to a county water tower at midnight. Nobody knows my face here. Nobody is looking for me in Harlan County. I laughed once at the sheer simplicity of it. Just me and the gauges and whatever gurgling the old drain made in the dark. I didn't know yet that the gurgling wasn't old infrastructure. I didn't know it was listening. The first 3 hours passed without drama. I did the readings at midnight, 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., pressure stable, in temperature normal. I logged numbers I only half understood onto a clipboard form that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration, and I drank bad coffee and listened to nothing. The overflow drain was in the concrete at the base of the tower, about 6 feet in diameter, recessed behind a low retaining ridge. It was a wide mouth of shadow even in the fluorescent light, and it made a low, intermittent sound, part gurgle, part something lower than that, in something that registered more as a vibration in the chest than a sound in the ears. I noted it at 12:15. Ambient drain noise, I wrote. Pressure differential, probably. I did not acknowledge it. I followed that rule easily because it seemed like a sensible rule. You don't acknowledge drain sounds in industrial settings. You log them and you call someone if they escalate. Basic facility protocol. At 2 in the morning, while I was rechecking the pressure log from the previous week, trying to understand what the acceptable variance range was, I found something wedged behind panel B, pushed into the gap between the back of the panel housing and the wall. A small spiral notebook, the kind you'd buy at a gas station with a water-stained cover. The name written on the inside cover in rounded, careful handwriting was Delia. Her first entry was dated 9 months ago. It read, "Don't let it hear your name, and I know that's not on the official sheet. Trust me." The next 3 pages were standard shift logs, routine entries, pressure readings, nothing unusual. Then, starting around the 6th page, the entries changed. The drain sounds different after 3, not louder, more deliberate. It stopped for 4 minutes at 2:47, and I felt it like pressure in my sinuses. The drain rule is backwards. Ignoring it is what it wants. And that last line was written in harder strokes than everything else, the pencil nearly scoring the page. I turned a few more pages. The last entry, dated 8 months ago, read, "It waited 4 hours after I said my name out loud." 4 hours exactly. Then it started learning. The notebook ended there. I set it on the folding table and looked at it for a minute. Then I looked at the drain, then back at the notebook. Delia was clearly an anxious person, and some people weren't suited for isolated night work. The silence got inside them, and their imaginations filled the silence with structure and meaning and threat. I'd seen it before. I was not that kind of person. I had too many real problems to invent supernatural ones. I put the notebook in my jacket pocket. To read more carefully later, I told myself, mostly to humor myself, and went back to my clipboard. The drain gurgled softly in the corner. I did not acknowledge it. At 3:10 a.m., I did something small. I want to be precise about that because looking back, the smallness of it is what gets me. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't even a thought. It was the conversational reflex of a man who'd been alone in a concrete room for 4 hours and was slightly bored. I leaned over the railing of the base platform, the low steel rail around the monitoring area, and I looked up at the tower above me, eyeing at the curved underside of the dome disappearing into the dark, and I said out loud to nobody, "Marcus Hale, officially the most overpaid, glorified babysitter in—" I stopped. The drain went completely silent, not quieter, not gradually quieter. Silent the way a room goes silent when someone pulls a plug. One moment, and the soft rhythmic gurgling, the next nothing at all, the kind of nothing that has weight. I stood very still with my hands on the railing and listened to nothing, and the fluorescence hummed, the pressure gauges ticked faintly. My own heartbeat was suddenly audible. Then after a pause of exactly 4 seconds, I know it was exactly 4 because I was counting without deciding to count. The drain resumed. Same rhythm, same low, wet sound, as if someone had pressed unpause. I stayed at the railing for about 30 seconds after that, breathing evenly and telling myself it was a pressure valve, fluctuation in the feeder line, nothing. And the drain had a cycle, and I'd happened to catch the bottom of it. I went back to my folding chair. I finished my shift notes. I documented the pressure reading at 3:15. I poured the last of the coffee, which had gone lukewarm, and drank it standing up because somehow sitting felt too comfortable. The drain continued its soft gurgling. Nothing happened. And that, the nothing that happened, and the clean and uneventful silence after the 4-second pause, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because it gave me a license. It told my nervous system, you overreacted. It told the rational part of my brain. See, you were right, this is just drain acoustics and an anxious predecessor. I went back to my clipboard. I wrote drain noise, normal cycling in the anomaly column. I did not go outside. I did not look at the perimeter. And the rule said not acknowledge the sounds from the overflow drain, and technically I had acknowledged them. But I had done so by dismissing them, and dismissal felt like the same thing as not acknowledging. I told myself they were the same thing. I was wrong. But I wouldn't know that for 2 more hours. At 5:18 in the morning, the sodium lamp outside went dark. Not flickered, not dimmed. Went dark. The entire outside became black in an instant, and the only light was the fluorescent strips overhead and the green glow of Panel B's displays. Through the small reinforced window in the door, I could see nothing but my own reflection. I was standing at Panel B, logging the 5 a.m. reading when it happened. I went still. My hand was still holding the pen above the clipboard. The building felt suddenly smaller. Then I heard my name, spoken at a perfectly ordinary conversational volume, not shouted, not whispered, the same easy, slightly sardonic tone I'd used 2 hours earlier when I said it myself. It came from outside the door, from the direction of the gravel yard. Marcus Hale. Just that. No context, no follow-up. 2 words, then nothing. My voice, my exact inflection, the slight flatness I have in the second syllable of my last name. The almost question at the end of how I say my own name when I'm being ironic. I did not move for 3 minutes. I timed it on my phone, and I stood with my back against Panel B and watched the door, counted seconds and tried to decide what I knew and what I was inventing. When I finally made myself approach the window, I pressed my face to the cold glass and looked out. The sodium lamp came back on. The gravel yard was empty. The gate was still closed, the padlock still in place, the chain undisturbed. The equipment shed was dark. And leading from the overflow drain, from the wide concrete mouth at the base of the tower, I'd across the gravel through the gate to the door, were footprints. Human footprints, work boots from the pattern, average size. They stopped at the door, directly in front of where I was standing. There were no prints leading away. I took out Delia's notebook from my jacket pocket and read it from the beginning this time. all of it, without skimming. I read the early entries that seemed mundane, the way she documented her own arrival, the way she noted the drain sound, and the way she wrote ordinary shift logs in between her increasingly urgent additions. What I'd missed the first time was the pattern in the dates. She'd said her name on the third night. She wrote about the consequence 5 pages later. The gap between the entries was exactly 4 hours. Her last entry. It waited 4 hours after I said my name out loud, 4 hours exactly. Then it started learning. I'd said my name at 3:10. It was 5:22. 4 hours and 12 minutes. In either the thing was less precise than Delia said, or I had started the clock later than I thought. Neither option made me feel better. I ripped the official guidelines sheet off the door and read them again. Not the way I'd read them the first time. Casually, dismissively, with the self-satisfied competence of a man who assumes institutional caution is always excessive. I read them the way you read a contract when you realize you've already signed it, and the language was vague in specific ways. That was the thing. It wasn't clumsy writing, it was precise vagueness, the kind of precision that comes from a legal team reviewing every word. Rule 3 didn't say do not investigate the sounds from the overflow drain or do not approach the overflow drain. It said do not acknowledge. The difference between those things is enormous. Do not acknowledge is designed to produce a very specific behavior. Ignore it, mentally and verbally. Don't look at it, don't speak to it, don't reference it even in your own internal narration. Someone who understood what was in the drain wrote that rule. Someone who understood that acknowledgement, any form of it, was the thing that mattered. Rule 4 said report anomalies to the emergency line. Do not investigate personally. That line, do not investigate personally, wasn't about liability. It was about something else, something that required the anomaly to remain unwitnessed, unconfirmed. As if confirmation itself had weight. The whole sheet read differently now, not as bureaucratic caution, as containment etiquette. Written by someone who had worked here long enough to understand what lived under the tower, and who had chosen language deliberately. Language that kept the county legally insulated while giving a prepared reader everything they needed to stay safe. I found the second notebook an hour after that. Around 6:30 a.m., I tucked inside the electrical panel in the back of the equipment shed. I had broken Rule 5, do not open the equipment shed after dark, but dawn was beginning to gray the sky, and I told myself the rule must mean full dark, not transitional light. I was rationalizing, and I knew it, but I needed the notebook. This one was older. Water damage, the cover warped, and some pages fused at the corners. The name inside was Roy. The handwriting was larger, blockier, pragmatic. Roy's rules contradicted Delia's in 2 specific places. Delia believed you should never look at the drain. Roy believed you should watch it actively. That passive awareness let it approach without friction, and that direct visual monitoring created a kind of pressure that slowed it. Delia thought the silence was threatening. Roy thought the silence was actually the moment of maximum safety, that the sound meant it was moving, and silence meant it had reached wherever it was going and stopped. Roy lasted 6 months at this post. His final notation read, I think it was here before the tower. The tower just gave it a reason to stay. I set both notebooks on the folding table and looked at them. 3 sets of rules now. The official sheet, Delia's notebook, Roy's notebook. They didn't agree with each other, they couldn't all be correct. And in the question that followed from that, which one of them had been written after the author made some kind of arrangement, was not a question I wanted to sit with too long. But I sat with it anyway. Because I needed to know which rules I was willing to trust. And the answer I kept arriving at looking at the footprints that had come from the drain to my door during the 4-second silence, was none of them. I stopped following any rule book. That was the decision. Not dramatic, not principled, just practical. I had 3 contradictory rule sets and 1 observable phenomenon, and the phenomenon was more reliable than any of the rules. So I watched. Over the next 90 minutes, from roughly 6:40 to 8:15, the sun now fully above the flat line of the eastern fields, the light coming through the small high window in gold bars across the concrete floor. I made a study of it. The drain resumed its sound shortly after dawn, when the footprints in the gravel slowly flattened in the wind, losing definition, becoming suggestions of footprints rather than clean impressions. Nothing moved outside the fence. I tested the sound response. I walked past the drain without looking at it. It continued its rhythm. I stopped near it without speaking. Same. I made a loud sound, dropped my clipboard deliberately, and there was no change. The sound was impervious to nonverbal noise. I said a word that wasn't my name. Nothing. I said a word that was someone else's name. Roy, Delia, Kevin, and nothing. I said a phrase that contained the word Marcus without it being a proper introduction of myself. And nothing. What it responded to was specific, not sound in general, not even speech in general. Names, personal names, spoken by the person they belong to in the first person. It responds to names, not to sounds. It copies voices it has already heard, not ones it hasn't. Which explained why it used my voice when it spoke, not some generic voice, not Delia's voice, not Roy's. It had learned mine in that 3-second window when I said it myself. It could not pass through metal. The locked gate, the steel door, the panel B housing all seemed to function as boundaries. It had no problem with concrete. The drain was its access point, not its home. It came from the drain, but it didn't originate there. The drain was an entrance, not a residence. It approached when ignored. Roy was wrong. Ignoring it wasn't safe. Delia was right about that much. But Delia's solution, never look at it, didn't fully hold either because the looking wasn't what drove it back. Direct address did. Speaking to it, speaking at it, not by name but in acknowledgement of its presence, produced retreat, as if attention rather than concealment was the deterrent. Addressing it by name, if it had a name, if it was the kind of thing that had names. I was not going to test. Every instinct I had said that giving it a name would give it something I couldn't take back. I took the back of a blank shift log form and wrote my own rules in small, tight sentences. Rule 1. Do not say your name aloud. Do not say it quietly. Do not say it in your head in a way that might translate outward. Rule 2. If it speaks, respond to the sound, not to the content. Say something simple that acknowledges the vibration without engaging the meaning. Rule 3. The drain is its access point, not its home. Watching the drain does not contain it. It contains itself until it has reason to move. Rule 4. These rules are provisional. They are built from 90 minutes of observation by one person under conditions that may not be repeatable. Treat them accordingly. I looked at what I'd written. It was the most honest thing in the room. At 6:45, my replacement was due to arrive at 7. I had 15 minutes. I was standing at panel B running the final log of the shift, trying to keep my handwriting legible despite the low-grade tremor that had been living in my right hand since the footprints, when it spoke again. This time it didn't use my voice. The voice that came through the drain, not loud, not soft, just present the way a voice sounds in a small room when someone is standing close, was a woman's. Steady. Calm. No panic in it. No performance of threat. the kind of voice that might read a weather report or leave a professional voicemail. "You found Roy's book," it said. "Roy was careful. You could stay as Roy stayed." I kept my eyes on the pressure gauge. I kept my pen moving across the log sheet. I let 2 seconds pass, not ignoring it, not engaging it, just sitting with the observation that it had spoken. Then I said evenly to the room, "I know what you're doing." A pause. The drain went quiet for 2 seconds, not the full silence from before, a thinking silence, if that wasn't too much of a projection. Then, "You're the first one who mapped it. The others followed the rules. You made them. That's different." The compliment landed wrong. Not because it was false, necessarily. I had mapped it. I had made my own rules. But because the thing offering the compliment was something that waited 4 hours before appearing outside a door, in something that used a dead woman's voice to seem calm, something that had come through the overflow drain to stand 3 feet from me and reproduce my exact inflection. Compliments from that kind of entity are worth examining for the thing they want you to lower. I didn't answer. I watched the drain in my peripheral vision, not looking directly at it, not looking away. I let the silence extend until it felt like a statement rather than an absence. 8 headlights swept the window at 7:02. A company truck rattled over the cattle grid at the road entrance and came to a stop outside the fence. I heard a door open, footsteps on gravel. The drain went quiet, not the threatening silence, just quiet, as if the session were over. I exhaled once, long and slow, through my nose. Then I straightened my clipboard and went to open the door. His name was Kevin. It was on the work order clipped to my outgoing log. Kevin Marsh, technician grade 2. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with the easy confidence of someone who'd done facility checks before and found them boring. He had a company thermos and a bag of sunflower seeds, and he was already reading the laminated guidelines on the door before he'd fully stepped inside. "Overnight was quiet?" he asked, not really asking. Making conversation. I handed him the shift log, pressure stable all night. One anomalous sound from the drain around 3, but it cycled back within a few seconds. He was nodding along, eyes still on the laminated sheet. "These are pretty standard," he said. "No unnecessary noise near the platform, report anomalies." "Yeah, I've seen setups like this. The drain thing is a little unusual, but I guess old infrastructure." "Yeah," I said, "probably old infrastructure." I picked up my jacket. I picked up my thermos. I did not pick up Delia's notebook or Roy's notebook. They were still on the folding table, and I got as far as the door. Kevin was flipping through the log sheets now, doing the new guy thing where you review your predecessor's work to establish a baseline. He was holding the clipboard at a slight angle, frowning at a number he probably didn't understand yet. He would learn it, or he wouldn't. "The rules on the door are—" I started. He looked up. His face was open, attentive, professionally interested. I stopped. What would I say? The rules on the door are real but incomplete. And behind panel B there's a notebook from a woman named Delia who isn't here anymore, and inside the electrical panel in the shed there's a notebook from a man named Roy who lasted 6 months, and whose final note says the thing was here before the tower. What would I say about the footprints that came through a locked gate? About the voice in the drain that used the calm, steady tone of someone reading a weather report? About the fact that it knew I'd found Roy's book, which meant it was paying enough attention to know things I hadn't told it? Kevin was 24 years old, and he was eating sunflower seeds, and he had a grade 2 certification, and he was looking at me with polite attention. I had a forged name and $40,000 of borrowed trouble in a notebook in my jacket pocket that I had taken without deciding to. "Are pretty clear," I finished. "You'll be fine." He nodded and went back to the clipboard. I walked out the door, crossed the gravel, and got in my truck. The footprints from 518 were still faintly visible near the gate. Kevin would walk over them in about 6 minutes when he went to check the exterior gauges, and he would not know what he was walking over, and the gravel would absorb them by mid-morning and they would be gone. I started the engine. I pulled onto the gravel road. I told myself Kevin would be fine, and I told myself the official rules were probably enough for most people. People who didn't say their name out loud in an empty room at 3 in the morning like a man announcing himself to the dark. I told myself Delia's notebook was in my jacket pocket and not on the table beside the coffee maker, where Kevin would find it, because Delia's notebook might scare him and fear made people do unpredictable things. I drove. The flat fields slid past on both sides. The grain elevator shuddered. Ian appeared and disappeared in my rearview mirror. By the time I reached the highway, I had almost convinced myself that the notebook was not my responsibility. Almost. 3 weeks later, I was in a motel in Elkton working a day job at a machinery warehouse under a different borrowed name when I went back to Harlan County. I don't know exactly why. Guilt is the easy answer, and guilt is probably part of it, but there was something else too. A need to know whether Kevin was still there, or whether the agency was still running shifts, whether the laminated guidelines on the green door still said the same things they said on the night I left. I parked on Route 9 and walked the last half mile. I told myself I was just looking. The sodium lamp was on. The fence was intact. The gate was padlocked. Through the window of the main door, I could see the glow of Panel B's displays. Active shift. Someone was in there. I circled the fence perimeter at a distance, staying on the grass, and the overflow drain was visible from the south side, the wide concrete mouth in the shadow of the tower's base. Quiet. No sound carried to where I was standing. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I hadn't planned what I would say if someone opened the door, and I didn't plan it now. I just stood in the field for a while in the dark and listened to the county hum around me. On the way back to my truck, I noticed a supply box that someone had left near the gate. Cardboard, slightly damp, labeled with the county seal. It had been left for the outgoing shift to collect, I assumed. Standard consumable rotation. The box was open. A clipboard lay on top with an outgoing log sheet, and tucked under the clipboard, visible because the top cover had bent back in the wind, was a small spiral notebook. New cover. Dry. Recent. I shouldn't have looked. I took it out and held it under the lamplight. The handwriting on the inside cover was blocky and large. Mail, I would guess. Odd from the pressure. Kevin, I would know from context. The first entry read, "For whoever comes after me, the official rules are wrong. Here's what actually works." The second page was blank. I stood there for a long time, the notebook in my hand, the lamp humming orange above me, the drain silent somewhere in the dark behind the fence. Kevin had broken a rule. Kevin had paid for it the same way Delia had, the same way Roy had eventually, and the same way you always pay for broken rules when the rule book was written by someone trying to protect you from yourself. He'd gotten far enough to understand the official rules were wrong. He hadn't gotten far enough to finish the correction. I could put the notebook back. I could put Delia's notebook in the box beside it. Both of them together, a partial map better than nothing, for whoever the agency sent next. I could write my own entries on Kevin's blank second page. I had 4 rules. They were provisional and honest and built from evidence rather than inherited fear. They weren't complete, but they were mine, and they had gotten me to Sunrise, and that was more than Delia's 4 rules had done for her. The alternative was walking back to my truck with both notebooks and letting the agency send someone new with nothing but the laminated sheet. Let them spend 3 hours deciding the drain rules were an overreaction. Let them say their name out loud at 3 in the morning, half joking, and wait 4 hours in the silence for the consequence. I thought about Kevin, who was 24 and had eaten sunflower seeds and had looked at me with polite attention. I thought about the voice in the drain. Steady, calm. You could stay as Roy stayed. I thought about Roy's final notation. I think it was here before the tower. The tower just gave it a reason to stay. I opened the notebook to the second page, and I took out a pen. I wrote the first rule. Do not say your name aloud. Then I stopped. Because I was writing in Kevin's notebook, and whoever came after Kevin would read Kevin's handwriting first and mine second, and would have no way of knowing which of us had made which rule and would have to decide. Just as I had decided, just as Kevin had decided. Which version of the truth to follow? Which version had been written after the author made a deal? I closed the notebook, and I put it back in the box. I put Delia's notebook on top of it. I did not put my rules in there. My rules live in my jacket pocket on the back of a county shift log form, in handwriting that only I can identify. That's the only honest disclosure I can make. I know which rules I wrote. I know they came from watching, not from inheritance. I know they weren't dictated by whatever is in the drain. I don't know the same about Kevin's, and the person who comes after Kevin won't know it either. That's the cycle, not malicious, not designed, just structural. Every rule set is compromised by the possibility that it was written in negotiation, and there's no way to verify the author's position from the text alone. The only person whose rules you can trust is yourself, and the only way to make your own rules is to spend a night at the water tower. I walked back to my truck. I drove to the highway, and I did not say my name aloud the entire way. I still don't. Not anywhere near water, not near drains, not near the quiet, dark spaces where something might be sitting, patient and precise, 4 hours of silence already counted down on a clock I can't see. Not until I know what happens if it hears it again. I don't know what happens. That's the part with no notebook covers.